Another pleasant afternoon. Well, may not be so pleasant for you, who knows. I want to look at the significant role that vested interests play in a parliamentary democracy. Now, we're consistently told that democracy is rule of the people, by the people, for the people. Now, I'd include with that by an engaged public, rule of the people, by the people, for the people, by an engaged public. And as we've discussed before, there's very little engagement by the Australian public in the political process for a variety of reasons, which range from total lack of interest to disillusionment to vested interests ensuring that our minds are more on circuses than bread. The first thing we need to remember is that although we have a parliamentary democracy, it's based on the concept of representation. What that means is you elect a representative to make decisions for you for the next 3 to 4 year periods. You send them to Parliament, whether it's the upper house, the Senate in Australia, the House of Representatives, at the federal level, and they're entrusted by you to make decisions. Now, it doesn't matter what they promise you. The decisions they make, unless they're challenged in the High Court because of a constitutional debate, normally don't change. So that's what parliamentary democracy is. It's not about people making decisions through direct democratic means and delegation, but it's about representation. It's a very primitive form of democracy. The important thing about about parliamentary democracy is that it's easily manipulated, and that's where vested interests come into place. So what's a vested interest? Well, a vested interest is an organisation or a group of organisations or a corporation or a group of corporations who wish to maintain the status quo, because that political status quo improves their bottom line or helps them to exercise power or helps them to generate wealth for themselves or their major shareholders. That's what a vested interest is. Now, in a parliamentary democracy, we talk about the fourth estate and the importance of the fourth estate. Now, the fourth estate traditionally was the legacy media, and it continues to have a huge impact, especially newspapers, whether they're online or whether they're a paper variety. What happens in this country, at least, is that the agenda for the day, whether it's on radio, television or social media, is set by the newspapers the previous day. And that gives people who own the means of communication, who own the legacy media, an extraordinary amount of power in terms of being able to generate specific conditions which allow their interests to continue to dominate the parliamentary agenda. Now, in Australia, it's not like a more authoritarian country, say North Korea or Russia or China, where a central committee or an individual sets the agenda. It's a much more subtle form of control. It's not about telling parliamentary representatives how to vote. It's about ensuring that the only points which go to Parliament for debate and ratification are points which suit vested interests. And to a significant degree this has occurred because our parliamentary, or the Australian Parliament, it's not our, but the Australian parliamentary democracy is owned to a significant degree by these vested interests. Not only do they own the means of communication, which can change the tone of debate or create fear or hysteria in the community, and we see it constantly during parliamentary elections, but at the same time, what we have in Australia is a parliament which is dominated not by independents, independent voices, independent representatives, but a parliament which is dominated by 2 or 3 major political parties. And that is a huge issue, because if you are a political party and you wish to win power, you need to come to some accommodation with those elements in society which own the means of communication, and those elements in society which have an overwhelming influence on the economy and result in economic policy. That's what a vested interest is all about. It's about maintaining the status quo or improving their position. So we've got this continuous struggle between public interest and vested interests. And most vested interests in Australia today are enshrined in corporations, because our economy is the most corporatised economy in the Western world. So when there is debate about price gouging or debate regarding the extent, the power that specific corporations have, we always see that these debates basically are nothing more than debates, and there's no change in parliamentary legislation. For example, during the global financial crisis and after the global financial crisis in 2008, we've seen a number of royal commissions which have shown the bankruptcy, the total bankruptcy, that's the moral and ethical bankruptcy of the financial sector, especially the major banks. And although they were involved in illegal behaviour which was outlined in royal commission after royal commission, not one individual ever appeared before a court. That's the power of a vested interest. The ability to shirk any attempt to limit its power. You may have a Senate inquiry, but a Senate inquiry is just that. It's a Senate inquiry. You may have a Royal Commission which throws light on a particularly difficult situation, but it's just a Royal Commission. What happens to the recommendations of a Royal Commission are determined by the ruling party. And again, parties have policies. And when you vote for a particular party in this country, irrespective of who you vote for, because we have a preferential system, your vote will be allocated to one of the major political parties, whether it's Liberal, whether it's Labor, whether it's National, whether it's Green. It'll eventually be allocated to them, except in those situations where well-known independents have been able to become representatives. And even in Parliament, we'll usually find the major political parties, the majority of issues, vote in unison. And it's only occasionally that there is some type of debate regarding a particular issue. So while vested interests dominate the political scene, inequalities in power and wealth will continue to grow. And the thing about the 21st century in so-called Western parliamentary democracies is that that gap has increased dramatically. And it's increased for a variety of reasons. One, the globalisation and corporatisation of the economy, which has removed competition between major corporate entities in this country. That's one reason. Minimal competition. But more importantly, What's is created a climate of fear. Not fear in terms of the Secret Service knocking on your door, not fear of appearing in court because of political opinions, but an economic fear which is much more immediate. Because most Australians today are totally incorporated in the private investment for private profit mantra. They're incorporated through superannuation, where the proportion of their wage, 10%, is used to finance the stock market. And although you may have some small personal gains, it's those people who have the most to invest who have the most to gain. At the same time, most people have some type of financial debt, whether it's with a major bank, whether it's with these new credit agencies. But the dilemma in 21st century society, especially if you go into higher education and you start your life off with a HECS debt, the problem is that we are economically manacled to the system. Very few people have the disposable income to shrug their shoulders and do what they want. Most people, whether in small business or not, are basically wage slaves. What that means is that you work to satisfy your immediate needs: food, shelter, security, health, education. And that's why vested interests have such a can apply such significant pressure on parliamentary parties. It'd be a different matter if Parliament was made up of a majority of independents. Then you would have the situation where the parliamentary representative is directly responsible to the people. That's what an independent is about. They're directly responsible. Their responsibility is not to the political party that has endorsed them in a winnable seat. And that's a great weakness of a parliamentary system which is dominated by political parties. Because these political parties, in order to be re-elected in a capitalist society, need to march to the same drum beat of those who exercise power and accumulate wealth. That's why public interest before corporate interest was established. It was established in many regards to bypass this parliamentary impasse. It was established to highlight the fact that power and wealth determines legislative outcomes in a Western parliamentary democracy. We like to think that somehow we have more personal freedoms than anybody else. Well, we may have more personal freedoms, but the reality is that is bought as a consequence of economic slavery. As long as we are willing to follow the private investment for private profit mantra and support the current economic framework and the current parliamentary system, which is dominated for political parties, we are able to be rewarded in our society. Be rewarded by having more financial chains and balls and chains attached to our bodies, so we become part and parcel of that very system that exploits us. That's why in this country, which is the richest country on earth, we have around 30% of the population living near or below the poverty line because they have to rely on social security benefits. That's why we have a growing group which is called the working poor, whose income is so low, whose jobs are so insecure, whose superannuation payments are so minuscule that they'll never be able to have enough disposable income, not only to enjoy life as I speak while they work, but enjoy life when they retire. At the same time, we have a public education sector which has been ransacked to provide resources to a private education sector that doesn't need those resources. We have a public health system which lurches from day to day, from crisis to crisis, because there's never enough financial backing, never enough staff, never enough operating time to deal with the load that they are faced with. But we do have sport, and if you can't afford to go, you can always watch it on free-to-air television. And you've got concerts, if you've got the disposable income. But the fact is that ultimately circuses are there to entertain us. They are there to draw our attention away from the major issues which we face. Whether it's a climate emergency, which to a significant degree has been caused by humanity, by an economic system based on profits for profit's sake, irrespective of the human, social, environmental costs. The fact is, nothing will change in a parliamentary democracy until vested interests are brought to account, until we have antitrust laws which prevent corporations from becoming too large and inhibiting competition, until our parliamentary representatives fear the electorate more than they fear the political parties they belong to. Because ultimately, theoretically, power lies in your hands. And whether you're willing to exercise that, whether you're willing to help refashion the concept of democracy to go beyond a parliamentary representative system to a direct democratic model, is up to you. Because this is the first generation since colonisation began in 1788, which is going backwards financially, which is going backwards in terms of social mobility, which is going backwards in its inability to enjoy life. Think about it. Ultimately, the choice is yours. You can tear up your membership card of the somebody should do something about that tribe, and you can tear up your membership card of the Gunner tribe and become involved in social action, political action, cultural action, which challenges the status quo, which challenges vested interests which now dominate every aspect of our existence.